Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 12th, 2020, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the 2020 election prediction if Donald Trump resigns from office. Now, I understand that this is a very unlikely scenario. Number one, this has never been really hinted at by the president, but this was a member decided video, not necessarily the outcome, but more so that I'm doing it. And pretty much if you join as a member on my channel as the second rank or above, you get to request a singular video that I will go ahead and produce. So this one was one of them. But yeah, so it's that little join button right next to the subscribe button, and that's pretty much it. So this scenario would be very interesting. Number one, first of all, we're talking about a very interesting landscape. Joe Biden would obviously be the favorite to win this election. You're talking about Mike Pence, the VP, all of a sudden taking the place of Donald Trump in this election. And first of all, they're pretty much opposites in terms of their campaign tactics, especially at debates. The way that they hold their rallies. Mike Pence was pretty much put on the ticket in order to counteract some of the more, I guess you could say, explosive nature of Donald Trump. It certainly has had its attributes for Donald Trump and also his faults. So I would say that's probably one of the main things about him that really entices a lot of Americans to either love him or hate him. I don't really think there's an in-between at this point. Taking a look at what we've seen across the nation, Donald Trump is either a figure that people really love and would consider to be one of the best presidents or one of the worst. And we really didn't see that with any other type of presidential candidates in the past. I think the last time I could say that the at least entire side of a country would adore a president would be Ronald Reagan. And I think we're starting to see some people put Donald Trump in that particular column. As whether or not that's what you personally believe in, again, that's just what I've been seeing on terms of social media and treatment from the people. But for Mike Pence, he's completely different. Number one, he's boring. I would say that if you think Joe Biden's boring, Mike Pence is way worse. And when we're talking about Mike Pence's beliefs, he's a lot further to the right than Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually was to the left of Hillary Clinton on a number of issues in 2016. So not saying that he was by any means a more progressive or more Democratic candidate than Hillary Clinton, but he definitely was to the left of her on a bunch of issues. And I honestly don't think that a lot of that is highlighted, especially as we go into 2020. Joe Biden's campaign is a lot more to the left than Hillary Clinton's by far, taking a look at all of the policies that he's proposed, and especially with adapting Elizabeth Warren's plans, which actually we haven't talked about the vice presidential nominee pick, so I actually might cover that in another video because we do need an update on that because he's supposed to announce that, I believe, either late July or early August, right before the convention at least, so they can print those signs in time. But Mike Pence himself, very far right in a sense when you compare him to Donald Trump. He hasn't had much of the spotlight recently, but I will say that I don't have too much hope for him as a presidential hopeful, even in 2024. Even if Donald Trump wins again, Mike Pence doesn't seem the go-to candidate for Trump supporters. He's unenthusiastic. He doesn't appeal to any type of minority base, whereas Donald Trump didn't necessarily, but, he does more than Mike Pence. Even though he's only winning 8% of the black vote, Mike Pence would probably win 4%, being completely honest. And this would have to come as a result, again, of Donald Trump's resignation, which means that the administration would be in shambles. We're talking about Donald Trump at a 39% approval rating nationwide right now off the most recent Gallup poll and CNN poll, which Donald Trump asked them to apologize for. And the Real Clear Politics average hovers him somewhere around, I think, 43%, so or 42.1%, I think, as last time I checked. So it is dipping down. Obviously, Donald Trump doesn't really necessarily seem like he would resign personally. If you take a look at the whole way that he puts up his entire campaign, I really think that he would stick through the presidency. But I will say we should take a look at a possibility of that because it's always fun to speculate. Obviously, if it doesn't come to happen, I think that it would just be an interesting scenario. But obviously, Mike Pence would be inheriting a crippled administration, which would make it extremely difficult for him to even come to the American people and ask for re-election. When Richard Nixon resigned and Gerald Ford took over, the only reason why that election was mildly close, which it actually pretty much was because Jimmy Carter said a number of things on the campaign trail that made his campaign a lot less feasible than what it could have been. I mean, he could have easily won as many states as Nixon. Maybe not as many as his 72 sweep, but maybe Nixon's first election. Carter could have had a much better presidential election than what he did in 76. But again, Joe Biden does make a lot of comments that he could necessarily mess up on, and I don't think Mike Pence would be as loud and as tweet happy as Donald Trump. But when we take a look at the overall landscape, I mean, Joe Biden said, you ain't black 3 weeks ago. And that does not even feel like it was 3 weeks ago. I mean, that was a long time ago in my perception of time right now. And Mike Pence himself, even though he may not be making comments, he has a lot of policy that he would need to, number one, rewrite. He would completely alienate the LGBT community. How small of the support they have for the Republican Party would be pretty much demolished. Mike Pence would also alienate a number of minority voters, and he's unenthusiastic. I mean, there's a whole enthusiasm gap right now between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, but that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. A vote is a vote. However, if a lot of Mike Pence or Donald Trump's vote is how would I say this? Is dependent on Donald Trump's campaign tactics. In 2016, his last-minute 2-week stretch through the entire Rust Belt was what won him the election. It wasn't the push the entire election season. He was focusing on these final 3 states within the final 2 weeks very heavily. Again, unenthusiastic voters, they are still voters, but Mike Pence wouldn't even be getting people out to the polls. These people are not enthusiastic for Joe Biden. They're enthusiastic against Donald Trump. But they would be just as enthusiastic as Mike Pence because they would see him as someone who is just Donald Trump 2.0. In fact, probably worse in their perspective because his policies are further to the right. For Joe Biden, however, again, you may not be enthusiastic to vote for Joe Biden, but you may be enthusiastic to vote against Donald Trump. And a lot of these Trump voters aren't enthusiastic to vote against Joe Biden. A lot of them are enthusiastic to vote for Donald Trump. So when you take Donald Trump out of the equation, again, Mike Pence will retain the majority, and I mean the majority of the base, which is why a lot of these states are still red, but it will make it a lot more difficult for him to win in swing states. I do think that, again, a number of states are going to narrow down. I think overall Mike Pence's unpopularity in Indiana may narrow down to a likely state. Him governing the state, he was not popular. I don't think he was too heavy on Donald Trump's victory in Indiana. I think Donald Trump's swing in this entire area by, around 10%, in some states even larger than that, in cases like Ohio and Iowa, almost 13% in some of those states. I think Indiana swung very much with the rest of the states. I don't think it was because Mike Pence was on the ticket. And in fact, Mike Pence was probably one of the reasons why the Democrats were the favorites to win the governor mansion in Indiana in 2016. They only narrowly edged it out in comparison to the Donald Trump victory. So very interesting to see looking at that map. But Donald Trump is number one, probably the strongest Republican candidate that I've seen in a while. In 2016, I don't think any Democrat would have beaten Hillary Clinton in this in 2016. I really legitimately do think Donald Trump is the only Republican in 2016 who could have beaten Hillary, because the Hillary campaign was ready for any type of Republican except for Donald Trump. They were ready for the Jeb Bushes, the Marco Rubios, the Ted Cruzes, the Chris Christies. They had 2015 polling data didn't even include Donald Trump until he announced in July. So nobody was really speculating a Donald Trump presidency. Nobody thought it was likely. Nobody thought that it was going to happen. And again, they were all wrong. We were all wrong mostly. And Donald Trump ended up being president. But again, let's just go ahead and focus back on this Mike Pence map. The reason why Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico would be considered safe, I'm actually going to keep Colorado and Virginia probably likely, but definitely high-end likely, talking about maybe 11, 12% in terms of margins. Right now, Joe Biden probably will win these states by around 9% over Donald Trump, maybe 8 to 9% statewide, and that's not a good margin. Mike Pence, I do think, will lose a number of voters in swing states, but I still think that he's going to retain the overall, electoral college states that Donald Trump would overall carry, states such as Nebraska or Kansas or Oklahoma. And of course, Joe Biden would be more solid in states that he was already going to win over Donald Trump. I think that this map would put Mike Pence in a very difficult scenario, considering that he would be having to win back voters that already moved over to the Joe Biden column because of Donald Trump, and then in a scenario where he resigned, it would be even worse. It would be way more difficult. But we are a very polarized nation. Donald Trump's impeachment doesn't even seem to be making an impact on the electoral map, and Donald Trump is only one of 3 presidents to ever be impeached in this country. So, again, not necessarily the best track record, but I will say that a lot of those presidents did end up being popular after their terms or after impeachment. So it is going to be interesting, but I don't think that Trump will resign. But again, this is a speculation video. I think that Maine at large will move to safe. I think Maine's 1st district, and I actually think Maine's 2nd district will be likely. Donald Trump is one of the only candidates, again, who could have actually flipped that second district. Mitt Romney couldn't do it. Paul Ryan couldn't do it. Actually, no real Republicans could have done it other than winning when they won the state as a whole in past elections. So it's very difficult for Republicans to win in those states, and Donald Trump was the only one who really appealed to those white working class voters, those white rural voters in states, even in the Rust Belt specifically, which is why I think that's going to be a huge cripple to the Pence campaign. I think that Biden would sweep the Rust Belt by likely margins, large likely margins, hold on to Minnesota as well. New Hampshire will absolutely go to Joe Biden, and Joe Biden would just win this election as a whole. He would carry Nevada, which history tells us that makes sense. But I do think Mike Pence will hold on to some larger states. I think that Texas itself will narrow down, but still go to Mike Pence again. A lot of these key Republican states are turned off, number one, by Donald Trump and are increasing in minority turnout. States such as Arizona only narrowed really because of Donald Trump being the Republican candidate. Now they have the combination of the past 4 years of a huge increase in minority voters. I mean, Phoenix itself is gaining 1,000 new people, 100,000 new people every year, which means that at this point it could be 400,000 new voters, and they're living in an urban area, and they typically split 80 to 20 for Democrat to Republican vote. So you can see how that would swing the state when just that amount decided it in 2016. For Georgia itself, again, that was narrowed up because Donald Trump was the candidate, but now we have an influx of minority voters that are increasing. In fact, the Democrats actually outperformed the Republicans in terms of primary turnout in 2020, something to note. But Mike Pence, I do think, could win back a lot of those Mitt Romney and John McCain voters that may have been turned off by Donald Trump in states such as Georgia, but I still think that Joe Biden would edge out Mike Pence in Arizona. Now, as we take a look across the country, I would say that Joe Biden has a realistic shot in Nebraska's 2nd District. Again, even though this scenario would pretty much prove the administration to be a failure, considering that the person who won the election had to resign, I still think that America still wouldn't be able to be fully fledged for one candidate or the other. This entire electoral map is only likely because of how polarized we've gotten. I mean, if you could think about it and think 30 years ago, when a lot of House elections, over, I think, around 190 House elections were decided by less than 5%. And now, because of gerrymandering and a number of other things, gerrymandering has been around since the 1700s, so don't be surprised that exists. But gerrymandering occurred a lot more, and partisanship also drastically divided this country. I mean, a number of states, Montana, Indiana, Missouri, North and South Dakota, were all competitive in 2008. 12 years ago, North and South Dakota were decided by a 9-point margin. Montana, a 2-point margin. Missouri, 4,000 votes. Indiana went to the Democrats. North Carolina went to the Democrats by 14,000 votes. So a lot of these races were actually a lot closer. West Virginia was a likely state. Hillary Clinton was polling ahead in Tennessee, in Kentucky, in Arkansas, in Louisiana. So yeah, in 2008, that was a whole different time period, it seems like, but it was only 12 years ago. Only 3 elections ago, in fact 2, considering that this one hasn't even occurred. So America has drastically increased in terms of polarization. We have stuck to our party lines to whatever, and that's the difficult part about this type of election. Even if Donald Trump did resign, Mike Pence would still have a realistic shot at getting some electoral votes. While Joe Biden, I do think, would come out on top, winning states such as North Carolina and Florida. I really don't see Mike Pence winning Florida in any type of scenario, but Joe Biden would carry North Carolina. He would carry Florida. But Mike Pence, I still think, would be the narrow winner in the state of Iowa. I don't think Joe Biden's appeal goes as far as Barack Obama's. And Iowa, I do think that it is a different landscape than Ohio. Number one, it's 6 electoral votes, so it won't be the main target of the Biden campaign. Also, he did not perform as well as he should have in Iowa, at least based off of his numerous primary performances now, winning 39 contests and counting. Didn't even come close in Iowa. I mean, I think he was 4th place in Iowa and then 5th place in New Hampshire. So he was not off to a good start in any of the early contests. 2nd place in Nevada, South Carolina is what put him over the top. But Mike Pence himself, I don't think he could carry Ohio. Number one, Ohio will be fought for a lot more than Iowa. I can guarantee that. And also, Ohio will probably be a lot more impacted by Joe Biden's number one regional advantage. And I do think that the grip on Iowa's voters was largely because Barack Obama was able to convince those white working class voters to vote for him. A lot of these states, such as Iowa, they don't necessarily have too large of a minority population. Again, the Democratic Party's victories in the Rust Belt and some other states are on the backs of white voters, suburban voters. And a lot of them have moved over to the Democratic column, which is why Iowa is no longer a 10-point margin for Trump, but we're now down to possibly a 2 to 3 point margin for Mike Pence. But I do think that the Biden campaign, number one, would focus a lot more efforts on Ohio. I do think that they would narrowly win it, but win it regardless. Again, winner-take-all system. Margins don't necessarily matter, but they also do if we're talking about a mandate. But this scenario would be very, very beneficial for Joe Biden. I mean, right now, taking a look at all the models that we see, Joe Biden is expected to get around 334 electoral votes. So this actually isn't too drastic of an increase if you think about it. It's only adding the state of Ohio to the Biden column. However, you do have to take a look at some of the states that have narrowed up. Again, with increased minority turnout, I really don't think that it could break that safe red characterization in the South, but a lot is yet to be seen for the 2020 election. So this finalizes the map. If Donald Trump was to resign and Mike Pence took his place as the presidential candidate against Vice President Joe Biden, that would be VP versus VP, Mike Pence would get 185 electoral votes and Joe Biden would receive 353. Thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you would like to see a video of your own, I do still do suggestions from a lot of you guys. I still read them all the time. I mean, almost like half of my videos probably at this point, or maybe like 25-30% of my videos have been from you guys specifically. I do these, I guess, faster, mainly because, again, the people that join as members on my channel are donating money to me, and it's really helpful. I'm getting new equipment, a webcam, a new microphone, so a lot of stuff that will help out the production on this channel itself. So yeah, so if you're considering that, there's a little join button that pretty much outlines it all, and that's pretty much it. Thank you all for watching this video again, and I will see you all later today.